Well, I want to say a big hello to Wharton Center patrons and welcome to our Wharton at-home virtual experience. I'm Bert Goldstein, director of Wharton Center's Institute for Arts and Creativity, and I'm joined by Kelly Stabile-Clark, manager of musical theater programs, and our very special guest, two-time Academy Award winner, Tom Hanks.
Long ago.
Tom, how are you?
I'm good. Long ago, man. That was the 90s. Now I'm just a three-time grandfather, but I'll take the intro. Thanks, Bert. Should we share the connection here, Bert? Should we share it?
We can share the connection. Go right ahead.
We were 1977.
Yep.
Bert and I were interns together at the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival in Cleveland, Ohio.
There we go.
Spears, building sets, changing over the sets, rotating repertory theater. And we've been in contact ever since.
That's right. Been an extraordinary ride, really extraordinary ride.
Well, you were in Cincinnati for all those years at the Playhouse.
At the Playhouse in the Park, and came to Michigan State, Wharton Center in 2008. So different choices later in life, but it's been good.
Hey,
it's good to see you again. It's good to see you,
Bert.
So you're in Australia. What's going on in Australia?
Well, I'm down here to work with Baz Luhrmann on a movie that is about the pairing of Elvis Presley with Colonel Tom Parker. We were about to start shooting it in March, but COVID-19 came along and took me out of the game and shut down film production, and don't have to, altered the world. So rather than kick the movie into even farther down the line, they've been able to work out the protocols and the procedures in order to actually make the movie with COVID-19 in place.
Great.
So here I am, living up to my responsibilities. A little bit of surprise. I thought it would. I didn't think it would happen until 21, but they figured it out. So I'm still in a 14-day quarantine, and when that's done, we'll get back to work.
Good. Well, good luck with the movie, and hope you get to finish it this round, because this is the movie that you were working on when you came down with COVID in the spring and had to go through all that. So you and your wife are feeling okay?
Oh yeah, we're fine. Yeah.
Great. So before we dive into our conversation, I just want to take a moment to thank the Michigan State University Federal Credit Union for their support of Wharton Center programs, and also for their passion for supporting the arts in the mid-Michigan community. Thank you to the credit union. And it's very hard to write an introduction to you, for you, or about you.
Let's begin.
I'm going to give it a shot. Two-time Academy Award winner, back-to-back before the age of 40, multiple Golden Globe Awards, including the Cecil B. DeMille Award, over 50 films. You've also worked as a director, a producer, a writer. You've acted on Broadway. Presidential Medal of Freedom, given to you by President Obama.
Yes. Kennedy
Center Honor, American Film Institute Lifetime Achievement Award, and that scratches the surface. But you've also had tremendous recognition for your advocacy for veterans programs, which I know people have been really appreciative of. I know you've had a very strong voice on environmental issues as well, that people have had been very appreciative of as well. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's been an amazing ride for you, it really has. I do want to start our conversation, though, talking about those days in Cleveland. You mentioned it. It was 1977. Jimmy Carter was president. There was a new show on the air called Saturday Night Live.
That's right,
and you were in Northern California, just finishing school, and you got invited to be an acting intern at the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival. And you ultimately spent 3 seasons there doing repertory theater, Shakespeare, other classical things. You were touring. You mentioned all the other hard work that we did. So I want to start this conversation by asking, how did early immersion in classical theater and Shakespeare shape you as an actor?
Well, the guy who gave both of us those jobs, Vincent Dowling, the late Vincent Dowling, who was the artistic director and very dedicated as only an Irishman can be, coming from the Abbey Theater over to the New World. to the whole concept of being in a company of players and doing a set schedule of repertory shows. Meaning on Tuesday night, you're doing Taming of the Shrew. On Wednesday night, you're doing Hamlet. And on Thursday night, you're doing Peg of My Heart. Different show. I think we had a 6-show season, but really was only 4 or 5 shows that were actually in hard rep.
Right.
But the great lesson that he taught, I think both of us and everybody who was there, was a bit of a line, a bit of blarney, but at the same time was very much true. You know, he said, I'm not going to do his Irish dialect, but imagine a good Irish dialect. You know, he said, I cannot pay you as an intern in my theater, but I can give you something that is much more valuable, and that is experience working with professionals. And that was really true. I mean, there were 5 of us that came from California. Vincent guest directed shows at universities and then would collect this kind of like coterie of people that would come and work in the invented intern program. And I was not paid. We were doing it on our own dime.
Right.
But what we were also doing was getting a window into a truly priceless experience that non-union college student actors could not have. And that was working it was a LORT, League of Resident Theater B house. We were performing in front of 1,000 seats. Sometimes they were full, sometimes they were not. But that's a big theater. That's a big season. And there was an equity company of seasoned professional actors who had worked in every different mode of professional show business: Broadway, film, television, musical theater, industrials, commercials, who made up the professional company that we were equals to, ostensibly, when it came down to 8 o'clock being on stage. Now, granted, you and I carried spears and had 1 or 2 lines in Hamlet or some of the other shows, but we also understudied the roles,
Right.
which in some ways we weren't really prepared to go on necessarily. But we were I actually got on as Rosencrantz.
I remember.
Did you get on as Guildenstern?
No, it was somebody else. It wasn't me. I never got on. I got on as an understudy the next year. I covered someone who had to miss a show. It was a small role. But yeah, we did. We spent a lot of time learning lines for shows we would never do.
Yeah. But even that, the fact that we were on stage with, watching Bob Elliott do Iago or Dennis Lipscomb do Hamlet or Barney Cates playing Polonius. We were at the theater on the same professional hours they were, actually maybe a little bit more because we had so many other responsibilities and work to it. We were in the program with our names. We were when we went out on stage, we were part of a grand ensemble of players that requires dedication and requires, working through some exhaustion. In some ways, it's a young man's game. But that professional experience is, in fact, priceless. It's the first job you have. And how many years did you do, Bert?
I did 2, and then I went back in 1981. You were in California by that time.
You
so I actually
did
3 years. I got my equity
Nickelback.
card. I got my equity card there eventually.
Right.
But I think part of the experience for me, and I'm sure for you, was working with the directors. These were top-notch directors. Dan Sullivan, who's since has a long list of Broadway credits, and you've revisited your career with him. We'll talk about that in a minute. But sitting and watching those directors, Vincent Dowling, Dan Sullivan, the other people that came in, how they dissected scripts, how they worked with actors, how they conceived productions, how they solved problems, was extremely influential.
It was because we had to do it. When you're studying in college, there's a theoretical, aspect to it. You are in training, you're learning. I know that you do shows, but I think before I did Great Lakes, I think the most of any one show I did was like George Gibbs in our town, and maybe we did 16 performances.
Right.
But when you open in a play on June 30th, and you're still doing that same play just a week before Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
you end up going through a profound change just by osmosis.
Right.
I don't think after 18 performances of anything I've ever done did I really even know what the play was about, because
Right.
there was so much choreography and learning the lines and what have you. And to be with those seasoned professionals who were in the biz, that were, also having equity meetings and complaining about where the equity cot was and things like that. It separates those that can from those that can't, from those that have the desire but do not have the perseverance.
Yeah.
I would say that our class of 1977 actually was pretty. Our ratio of people who went on to have careers in theater, educational theater or anything, is pretty spectacular.
Well, Jose Rivera, the Obie Award-winning playwright, was actually an acting intern, and he will be my guest in a couple of months. And he has gone on to do tremendous work as a writer, but he came up from Denison University to be an intern in that season as well. So you do 3 years of classical repertory theater, then you move to New York, and eventually you go to California, you start working in television, then the film career comes along, and that's explosive.
You make it sound so easy.
No, I know. But keep thinking about theater for a second, and we'll talk maybe more about the movies. Then in 2013, you choose to do a Broadway play.
Yeah.
You haven't been on stage in a while. The challenge of doing a Broadway show at that point in your career, what did you have to do to get ready, and what were the challenges performing 8 shows a night, eight times a week on Broadway?
Well, I have to go back to those 3 years at Great Lakes, in which I learned the most important lesson of anybody's career, not just mine, is that when you are a professional actor, your job. And Dan Sullivan yelled at us one day. I don't know if you were there. If we were doing rehearsing Taming of the Shrew, and he yelled at us because we were kind of lazy and tired, and even the equity actors were kind of like hungover. Yeah. And he said, "Hey, look, I can't do this all myself." He said, "Your job is to show up on time, know the text, and have an idea." And that simple triangle of an actor's responsibility, it's not particularly embraced by everybody. You'd be amazed at how many people on television, not so much, in movies, I think, because movies take an awfully long time in order to make. How often people can be a little bit late, not be quite up on the text that they're going to, and not feel as though they're even allowed to have an idea because of the nature of the camera and the direction and the lighting, what have you. But I went into it, and actually I think it served me pretty well, because I think I got a reputation even as a young actor as a guy who actually did show up on time and did know the text and did have an idea.
Sure.
That came from Great Lakes. Going back in 2013, I went to Broadway to work with Nora Ephron, who I'd made a number of movies with.
Right.
And she passed away, unfortunately, before we had even decided officially to mount the production of her play Lucky Guy. But luckily, George Wolfe and I said, we have to do this, because we wanted to somehow spend more time with Nora.
Right.
That's the great hang of doing a play. You become a family, and you do go to the same room every night, 8 times a week, and you really get to know each other very well. And you also get to know the play. But I was not 100% sure that I could literally keep the dialogue in my head. Okay. Everybody says when you make a movie, how do you remember all those lines? Well, you don't. You learn them, a couple of days before, and once you're done with a day's work, you never have to say them again. Right. So it's not like you hold the entire script in your head like you do with a play.
Sure.
The rehearsal process, thank you. My assistant is handing me a delicious hot cup of tea. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Showbiz. Um, um, the rehearsal process for Lucky Guy was absolutely luxurious.
Great.
It was easygoing. It was slow. At the same time, it was incredibly high energy. We had two simultaneous responsibilities. One is to figure out the play,
Right.
and two is to learn the play. You know, so yeah, there's times where you just learn it by rote. You're just getting the dialogue down, but that goes hand in hand with playing it and figuring it out at the same time. So I found that doing Lucky Guy, I was a little bit sad when every day was over, because making movies is often a 16-hour day when it's everything is running contrary to your ability to get the job done.
Right.
It's raining, things break down, someone starts hollering. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in the course of making a movie that has absolutely nothing to do with the finished product.
Right.
Rehearsing a play, though, every moment you spend working on it is going to come through sometime. So that by the time we opened, and I think you tell me, a Broadway play, I think, rehearses in a rehearsal hall for 6 weeks. And then you have a 2-week tech on stage as you're working it all out. Then you might have anywhere from 2 weeks to a month of previews, which we did, preview performances. Right. And then at some point, someone says, okay, we're locking the play. Everything as it is as of this performance is what we're going to be shooting for the rest of the run. Right. That was the opposite of a burden. It was actually a delicious joy.
Oh, good.
Because everybody says, well, how do you, the most basic aspect that a civilian asks is, how do you learn all those lines? Right. And it's like, how do you know all the words to your favorite Bruce Springsteen album? You just know them. You know what comes next. You sing along in the car. That's how familiar the text becomes with you. I was surprised at how fluid the process was from night to night once we began the run.
Yeah.
There were moments on stage after we had done 70 performances of Lucky Guy, where I heard somebody say something for the first time. It was the same line, right. It was the same context, but you end up kind of like surfing the water a little bit every time the curtain goes up, because the audience is different. They have different expectations. There's a difference between a Thursday night audience and a Friday night audience. You start at the beginning of the story every single night. And that's the greatest luxury of all. A movie, you're just getting a little slice of it. It's oftentimes made out of order. But you start with the first line every night on Broadway, and it's not over till you're done with the last line. So the constant renderings, the meanings of everything that happens, the beats that you play, the give and take that you have with other actors on stage is in fact it's like improvisational jazz. There's something slightly different every night. And in that slight difference, you go to a place that you haven't been before. Just one kind of like anecdote about it.
Sure.
Is that I found about the Broadway audience specifically, who are in New York, and everybody there essentially wants to see a Broadway show, and they got tickets to yours. So that's cool. That's great. A lot of people make their money that way. Our show was very New York centric. It was about New York in the 1970s and 80s. Most of the audience remembered the characters that we were talking about. And what I think I discovered is that the New Yorkers who go see every Broadway show because it's in their blood, because it's part of being a New Yorker, they come on the matinees. They come on Wednesday at 2:00 and Saturday at 2:00, because they're not downtown to have dinner. They're not staying in a hotel. They're not with their kids or their business associates. They're not having a bunch of glasses of wine at dinner. They are
Right.
there to see the shows. And so oddly enough, our matinees were white hot performances
Oh,
because
good.
the audience was 2 steps away, 2 steps ahead of us every second. They
Yeah.
got every single reference. And
Okay.
man, when you know that, we could dial stuff way, way back because they were already getting it. I
Yeah.
wish that, well, I don't know if I wish we could have done more or not because it was exhausting in many ways.
Yeah.
Um, and it was an emotionally rendering play, nor packed a lot of stuff in there. And
Hmm.
I think I was in New York for 6 months. I did the play for 4 of those months, and by the time we left, the idea of said, I honestly, I don't know if I can get there if I had to do this another month. I don't know if I
Yeah.
can get there. So I understand the realities of really enjoying a day off.
Yeah.
I don't want to drop like famous ass names, but I'm going to right now.
Go
Believe
ahead.
it or not, when he was still alive, I had phone conversations with Marlon Brando.
Oh,
No
I didn't know
lie,
that. Yeah.
Marlon Brando. We were trying to get him to come down and play the hobo in the Polar Express. And I was on the phone telling him I had met him at dinner a long time prior. So I mean, when you meet Marlon Brando for the first, you dine out on that for the rest of your life, right?
Sure.
So I'm talking to him on the phone, and I'm explaining to him the process. You'll come down. It's CGI, and we'll do a rendering, and all you really have to do is do it once, and then everything else will be taken care of. And he was very, now explain to me again this system, and it was very funny. And at some point or another, we were talking about his work in New York, and I didn't realize this, but he had done a number of plays before
Yeah. Right.
before he hit. He was an actor who was doing like the Rothschilds and things like that.
Right.
He would be the third lead or something. But when he got Streetcar Named Desire, and revolutionized the 20th century.
Right.
I asked him about, is it true he broke his nose boxing with a guy? He said, yeah, yes, I did. I was goofing around and, but he said that by that time, the play had been going on for a couple of weeks and he was restless. This is the guy who played Stanley Kowalski saying he was restless after a couple of weeks of working with Tallulah Bankhead in
Right.
Streetcar Named Desire. So he
Right.
was goofing around and they broke his nose by incident. So no, keep it. But he said, not only did I get a new nose out of it, but I got 3 weeks off. So if even Marlon Brando could use a couple of weeks off from the 8 performance a week thing, I didn't feel so bad about thinking, I think I've run the.
I think Patti LuPone talked about when she was doing Evita. Someone asked her what it was like to do Evita, and she said, and they figured she was living this glamorous New York Broadway life. She says, nope, I would go home every single night, turn on a movie with my boyfriend, sleep 12 hours, get up and do it again the next day. She said, I had no life.
George Wolfe came to me one day. This was when we were still in previews. And the thing about doing a Broadway show is everybody on the planet Earth knows exactly where you are at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night. You're at the theater. That's where you are. So somebody in Peru can find you. They know exactly where you are. And so I was meeting friends afterwards. We called it Act 3. And after you do the play, you come back and you talk, and maybe you go out and have a bite to eat or some drinks. And George Wolfe came to me and said, so how you doing? I said, well, holding up. This is it. You got to live like a monk. I said, what? You have to live like a monk. You cannot do Broadway. See your friends. You have to live like a monk. And you do. You do have to. You have to go home. You have to eat a bowl of Cheerios and maybe fall asleep. You're so popular. I ended up. I had this routine on Sundays. Our performance on Sundays would be. I think it would be at 5 o'clock. We sold out. Thank you very much. Sold out every single performing.
I heard.
But Sunday nights we'd be done at 7, and I'd let the theater eventually clear. And it's Sunday night, so Times Square is a little different. And I would walk back to my apartment, and I went to this same little grassy slope in Central Park if the weather was nice, and I would just lay in the grass at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 7:30, and let the light shift. The fireflies would come out, and I would take a nap. I would just take a nap in the grass under the tree as sort of like a reward for the end of April. I don't think an actor is a complete actor unless they have done 8 performances of a show.
Yeah.
I met a number of guys, particularly back, I mean, it's now, gosh, it's 7 years since, but I would come across, cohorts and peers who would say, what was that like? And I said, dude, you should do it. You should throw yourself into it, because it's an experience that pays off the next time you need to make a movie. It's a grand test. And the luxury of starting at the beginning of the story and telling it completely every single night, that's a joy.
So in that spirit, in 2018, you go back to Shakespeare. You play Falstaff in Los Angeles, a huge role, physically demanding, a lot of lines, intense, funny, tragic. So what was it like going back to doing Shakespeare after all those years? And Dan Sullivan, who directed you in 1977, came back and directed that production. So, and a bunch of us flew out to see you do it.
We had a GLSF reunion. Clive Rosengren said he should have played the part. What are you doing in my part? I'm Falstaff. I should play Falstaff.
There's a lot of people Googling Clive Rosengren right now.
Yeah, right now. Well, they should. He's an author now. He writes the Eddie Collins mysteries. So plug for Clive's book. Rosengren, just the way it sounds.
From North Dakota originally.
Yeah. My wife and I, Rita she got involved in what is now called the Shakespeare Center, Los Angeles, about 30 years ago. And then I got involved a little bit after her. She had done As You Like It, and we had done an awful lot of fundraisers for them, attempting to develop a classic, like a Vincent Dowling style Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival for Los Angeles.
Right.
An announced season of a professional company of actors that would perform classical things. Shakespeare, sure, but any classical take. And the push kind of came to shove. And this opportunity, I had a window, and I said, "Look, let's do something." They had a few years prior, they had built a theater in a eucalyptus grove on the campus of the Veterans Administration in Westwood, and I said, "Could we do that again?" And they said, "Well, yeah, but what would we do?" And I said, "Well, let's find something." So I cold called Dan Sullivan, who actually had directed my wife in a play called Dinner with Friends at the Geffen Theater that also played in Boston. So I'd actually seen him once or twice since 1980. Yeah, since 1980, And I cold called him and I said, "Hey, listen, we're trying to start a classical theater in Los Angeles. Would you entertain the idea of directing me in something?" And he said, Yeah, I would. That sounds fun. And I kind of went boing. And we ended up getting together. Now understand, Dan Sullivan directs every day of his life. He's at the University of Illinois. He's in Seattle. He's on Broadway. This is one of the most prolific, talented, if you are an aficionado of certainly Broadway, but any theater, you've seen a Dan Sullivan production. He's directed In the Park, For the Public. He's done a lot. And he was actually looking for something new, a new place to go. And I said, well, this is going to be a little bit threadbare, but what do you got it? And his idea was to explore the Prince Hal, Henry V, Falstaff dynamic over the course of the 2 plays, over the course of the Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2. And he said, I'd like to do I'd like to jam those plays together and make it really just about Falstaff and Hal. And I said, you mean me as Falstaff? He said, yeah. He said, like the fat suit, the whole bit. Said, yeah, fat suit. So that's literally the way it came about. And it was fantastic in every way. It was magical. We performed outdoors under a full moon sometimes in that same eucalyptus grove.
Yeah, you could smell the eucalyptus during the show. It was beautiful.
It was gorgeous. A little hard to find there on the VA, but nonetheless, we sold out the run. We were only able to get, I think, 30 performances in, but those 30 performances were magical. It was a long play. We were close to 3 hours.
Right.
But outdoors, and once we figured out, let's give them blankets to stay a little warm, we did okay. Here was if I was worried about keeping the lines in my head for Lucky Guy, I was petrified of the dialogue for Falstaff, because there's a lot of it.
Right.
Much of it is incredibly famous, quotable lines. You don't want to screw those up, you know. But also, it's Shakespeare's prose. It's not the iambic pentameter, so you don't have the structure. You don't have the 5 feet short long. You don't have that rhythm that actually, I think, aids the memorization process. Shakespeare's Falstaff speaks in the common class of prose, and so therefore it's just complicated dialogue. It's long paragraphs that do not balance out. And I will tell you that we had 30 days of rehearsal. We had 30 nights of performances, and I never had a blemish-free performance. I had a great guy who was working with me. I'll scream out his name in a minute when I can remember his name. Yeah. He was always down under the bleachers keeping track of mistakes I had made. And I had heard that Falstaff is not as old as I was, but I had read that Gielgud did Falstaff when he was 65. And I was 61 maybe, or so. I said, hey, I'm a young man. I should be able to. But oh dear Lord, the excitement, the delight, the building of it that went on. We had a fantastic company. Ron D. Reed was in it. Joe Morgan was in it. Joe Morgan, I remember. Hamish Linklater, he was in it. We had a fantastic company of actors.
I remember when we were in Santa Monica, the whole group of friends that came out to see you, we had lunch in your office, and I walked through one part of the office where you had a big, like, grease board or blackboard, and you had your lines from one of your speeches, and it was sort of, you just like walk by and refresh your memory from time to time.
That was the last big speech I had to get down, and I had this kind of like chalkboard, like in a science lab in college. You could slide one up. And I wrote it all out in my own handwriting. It's the sack speech. It's about the effects of sack. And okay, so it's probably day 25 of rehearsal, and I still don't have the entire play down. So I stood in my office and in the course of 8 hours wrote out that speech and was able to memorize it enough, only because I still have the blackboard, by the way. I never erased it. I still have 2 pieces of Falstaff there. But let me tell you this thing. Because look, eventually it would just worked myself into a puddle. It was a great time. But there was one night I was out. I can't remember what the speech was, but it's a famous one. And you know, when you're a young actor, they tell you, and all of the students who are listening right now, in order to audition for anything, you have to have 2 audition pieces, one serious, one dramatic, one comedic, one contemporary, one classical, right?
Right.
Those are the things you carry with you, and when you're doing a general audition, you've done them a million times, and so you can really uncork those bad boys and swing away, right?
Right.
Well, when you and I first moved to New York in 1977, do you remember what your pieces were?
God, I used to do poems from Henry V.
Okay.
No,
Oh, yeah.
no. I used to do this. I used to do Michael Williams from Henry V as a serious dramatic piece. And God, I don't remember anything else. What about you?
I
You
did.
must have done Proteus.
No, I didn't do Proteus.
Did you do Gentleman of Verona?
I actually did Iago.
Oh.
Oh, sir, continue. I can still rattle it off. Oh, sir, continue. I serve him to do my term upon, but we cannot all be masters, nor cannot all masters be truly followed. That was my dramatic piece, and I actually did John Q. Bruce's speech from Peg of My Heart anyway.
Well, it's funny you should mention Iago. Sorry to interrupt you. But I remember when we were sitting in a bar one night. At that point, talking about our dreams and aspirations and what we wanted to do, and we wanted to do classical repertory theater because that's where our heads were at the time. And we were exchanging ideas about what roles we want to do, and you said Iago was the role that you really wanted to do.
Yeah, I still do. I don't know if I'm probably a little too old for it now.
I don't think so.
But sometimes I still rattle off that speech. But I was out there in the third act, two scenes to go before the final curtain, and there was a phrase of Falstaff's that was just a word or two off from that audition piece as Iago. And without even knowing it, I rattled off two couplets from my audition piece as Iago. They're standing as Falstaff, but then I was able to circle back and complete it off. But when I went downstairs, when I was done, I was changing my costume for the next scene. The guy I was working with essentially said, "What the fuck was that?" Pardon my language. He said, "Where did that come from?" I said, "I'll tell you later.
Yeah,
so that stuff that you always think that when you do Shakespeare, you'll always be able to rattle off the greatest dramatic pieces in the history of literature. But I can only do it from my audition pieces.
Well, let me ask another question. Thanks for the stories on that. That's brilliant. I'm going to quote you, and it was on the internet, so you know it's got to be true.
Oh, it's got to be true. I don't do any CBD. There's all these things on the web that say I love CBD. I don't do CBD.
This is not a CBD question.
Okay.
Anyway, this sounds like you. I think this sounds like you. It says, you once said, all great stories in literature deal with loneliness. Sometimes it's by heartbreak. Sometimes it's by way of injustice. Sometimes it's by way of fate. There's an infinite number of ways we examine it. So looking at the array of characters you've played over time, this seems to be a recurring theme in your work. So is it a deliberate choice to choose those characters that are somehow attracted to the dilemma of loneliness?
No,
something you want to explore, or did it just happen?
I think it ends up being something that I relate to in many different permutations. For example, the loneliness of a movie like Castaway is literally physical. I mean, it's obvious. It's physical. There's just no doubt about it. You know why that guy's lonely. He's all alone. But then there's the type of aloneness or loneliness that Sully Sullenberger felt when he was in the midst of the investigation that went on after he landed that plane on the Hudson River. There is the difference between loneliness, which is harmful to the human spirit, and solitude, which is beneficial to the human spirit. The only difference between that is something deeply interior to the person who's going through it. You can be alone and experience wonderful solitude. You can be alone and experience crippling loneliness. And I think that's the aspect of the human condition believe it or not, Shakespeare is talking about when Hamlet gives his advice to the players, which I think, were you not in that scene in Great Lakes? Were you
Yeah,
not one of the players?
I
So
was some miscellaneous player. Yeah.
yeah, you know, when he says you must hold the mirror up to nature, I think
Nature. Yeah.
that's what the actor's job is. And I think the great struggle with being alive is managing and maintaining or extricating yourself from those connections that are bad for you. We naturally seek out company because we do not want to be alone, and yet we have connections that are contrary to the beneficial aspects of solitude. And I actually am cribbing, believe it or not, Vincent Dowling, who in one of the first evenings that I ever spent with him, he was in Sacramento and he was guest directing a production of Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard with a bunch of, community actors and college students. Bill Bursett, you remember Bill from our year? He was in that show. He was one of the interns that came along with us. Right. Jan Akers was in the show as well. Right. She now teaches at
Emory.
In Emory, down
Emory in Atlanta, yeah.
In Atlanta. He said, this play is about loneliness. This is a play about all these characters in the cherry orchard who are combating the loneliness that they naturally feel in their lives. A bit of a certainly a theme that Chekhov returns to over and over again. But he said, and all the great plays are about loneliness. All the great stories are about human beings not wanting to be alone. And I was 20, blew the back of my head off because I'd been constantly attracted to these certain types of films and certain types of plays. Eugene O'Neill and The Iceman Cometh, and Desire Under the Elms, and so many others. And I didn't quite have the artistic vocabulary to put such a good pin in it. But I think that when everybody wants to know no one knows how movies are made, and nobody knows what the decisions are. But when I've been able to ponder saying yes or no to a project, the yes is always an instinctive desire because it touches upon some aspect of that theme. Recently, as an actor, you always try to mention your most recent movies, just so people, so they don't just, because you can only talk about Forrest Gump so many times, Yeah. But there is, believe it or not, there is a type of loneliness that is examined by Fred Rogers in It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, that is different from Captain Phillips. Right. But it can be just as painful. Sure. And I think I turn to that aspect of the human condition over and over again.
So you're in a unique position that you can choose whatever you want to do.
You'd think so. Think so. The only real luxury I have is doing nothing as opposed to doing something. So
let's assume
there's any number of things I tried to make happen that never happened. So
you're not going to work as an intern again at a regional theater.
Although there'd be something to that.
Well, but I guess the question is, so how do you choose the projects that you want to do? Where's the decision there to say, I'm going to do this film or I'm going to do this play at this time? What's the process that you make that decision?
Well, it really is of a kind of like it's a desire in order to have an artistic experience. It's not just to work. Okay. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to pay the rent and make my car payments, and I can afford cheap Chinese food twice a week. I've been able to do that for a very, very, very long time. So I am blessed, lucky, fortunate in every kind of way. So the question really comes as to two things. Maybe only two, is what type of experience do I want to have? And also what theme do I want to explore? And is a individual project really examining a theme that is worth examining? And then how does it go about and do that?
Right.
One example, I'll use an example of Greyhound,
Sure.
which is, you can watch it on what's Apple TV.
Right.
You can only see it on Apple TV.
Right.
Of course, you can't see anything in the movie theaters right now anyway, so Apple TV. When I first started examining that as a theme, that no one else would write. I tried to get other people to write it, and no one was really seeing it sort of no one had the same fascination for it that I did. So I ended up working on it myself for the better part of 6 or 7 years, trying to condense down the structure of a movie, which is very learnable. You can learn how to write screenplays. You can learn the construct of screenplays, but you can't make them great movies. That requires somebody else. You can write them, because something has to happen on page 30, and they need to be about 120 pages long. Blah blah blah. There's a structure on it. But the same way you could build a house, but it might fall apart if you don't really have your contractor's license.
Yeah.
So doing that, there was a tremendous amount of loneliness that was involved in the character of Captain Ernie Krause, but it was saddled also with responsibility and fear. And so that's a different volatile mix of a guy alone who has nobody to rely upon,
Sure.
but himself. So I'm at this place now where I was able to. I wish we could have gotten a bigger budget. I wish we could have had more time in order to do it. But I was able, if the fantasy is true that I can actually make anything happen that I want to, I was able to do that. But it was a slippery slope every step of the way. But the question is then why? Why take that job as opposed to do some others? And it's because I wanted to have a very specific movie making experience of making a movie in a very specific kind of way, with a very specific sort of screenplay. And I also wanted to examine that theme that is not locked into the genre of a World War II movie, but actually it actually is expanded on that, because I think anybody, man, woman, child, adult, can wonder, well, what would I do if I was in the same circumstance? I think that's the thing about the movies that I'm attracted to, not just to make, but also to watch. If I can't imagine myself as that missionary in Japan, or that young man in tribal Africa, or wherever, if I can't imagine myself in those same circumstances, I'm not part of the process. Okay. If I see a play and it's about roller skating choo-choo trains, as opposed to people who are really going through something, I don't know what to examine here. I think a lot of people, I think the cinema allows for an experience of when you're watching it, in which it doesn't matter who the people are anymore. You actually are going through what they're going through the prism of your own experience, your own knowledge, and your own fears. And that's when that comes across, I've said this before, you probably won't quote me on it, but the easiest answer to give in show business is the answer, yeah, hey, let's do this. And I will tell you, almost 99% of the jobs I've done, I've read them and I said, okay, let's do this. This is one to do. It's very hard to say no sometimes. Very hard to say no. Because the people are great. The money would be good. You might meet the love of your life on it. You'll have a grand adventure. There'll be a lot of attention to it. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll occupy your time. But if it's not that forecast of an experience and an artistic theme, man, somewhere you got to find it in yourself to say no.
Okay. We have some questions from supporters, funders, patrons of the Wharton Center, and there's some good questions here. So I think I'll probably launch a couple of those. Our first one comes from April Clovis, who is the executive director of the Federal Credit Union, MSU Federal Credit Union. And her question is, Tom, as an actor, you've portrayed many iconic characters with a full mental and physical immersion in their persona. What is your process of returning to being yourself?
You would be amazed at the power of a costume that it has on you. That in the course of shaping that costume with like-minded artists, costume designers, the director, what have you, it becomes as weighty as a suit of armor, but as comfortable as a pair of silk pajamas, and I don't wear silk pajamas. There is a gestalt kind of click that goes off in your head that is matched with this knowledge. As long as you show up on time, know the text, and have an idea, what you can have faith in there is putting on the physical raiments, having the stuff done to your face and head, inhabiting a space that is specifically lit for a moment, that is literally a locked-in time and place where a truth is going to be found. And you can trust yourself to go there, to get there. And in fact, there are days prior to the shooting of a scene where I know what I'm going to be doing next Thursday in regards to the story we're telling. And I begin to prepare for getting there at that moment. Thursday afternoon's work is going to be very, very specific. And if you don't get it, you don't have the movie. Working up to that place is all-encompassing. And when it's done, it's as though the final gun sounded and the game is over. There is an actual, you're relieved. There's been days that I've been driving home from a set or walking back from a place where we are working, and I feel as though I've been unburdened by what I've done. So I'm not I can't say that particular characters have lingered with me for a long time, but particular behaviors have, and there's a knowledge that comes along that you end up still pursuing somehow. I don't, once I take off the clothes, once I take off the suit of armor, and it would be a crime, I think, to subject my kids and my family and my friends to whatever internal struggles or demons I've been wrestling with. So I'm off the clock. When I'm off the clock, I'm off the clock.
And thinking about what you've said, though, I mean, there's been so many iconic moments in your movie, so many great moments. The one that sticks in my mind just when I think about your work is the end of Captain Phillips, that moment in the hospital. What a great acting moment that, I mean, there's so many, but what a great acting moment that was. That just froze time for me. It froze time for me.
That is an example of showing up, being on time, knowing the text, and having an idea, because that was not in the screenplay. We were not prepared to shoot that. We didn't know we were going to. Paul Greengrass and I discovered at the same moment that the captain of the ship did not meet the captain of the ship that had rescued him, did not meet Richard Phillips until, as the captain said, after he'd come out of the infirmary. And Paul Greengrass looked at me, and then he looked at the captain of the ship and said, "The infirmary?" And 3 minutes later, we're down in the infirmary where we shot that scene. We're talking to the staff. Barry Aykroyd, our DP, was trying to figure out where he might have to hide some lights and how he would get the camera in there. And Paul was talking to the staff. A woman's name, I believe, was Cynthia. I may be wrong. Forgive me, Cynthia, if I'm wrong. And Paul said, listen, if we kitted out Tom here, would you be able to like sort of like go put him through a drill and do what you would do? And they said, sure, we do it all the time. And so from not knowing about that scene, 20 minutes later, we're shooting it. And that was an example of riding that wave, being in a place where Paul and I knew the text, we knew the theme that we were examining, we had a vision of what we were going for, and here was this bonus opportunity to go there. Yeah. And we did. And you know, from the beginning to the end, it was 90 minutes from start to finish, from finding out the word infirmary to being done with it.
It's amazing.
And that's the fluidity that could happen with a certain type of filmmaker and also in a certain type of film.
Right. So we're at an hour. Are you okay for a few more minutes, or do you have to
I'm
run?
Good for a little bit more, yeah.
Okay, good. If you get it, you know, if we get to a point, you can just tell me we're done and we can wrap it up. I got a couple more questions. Just a couple more questions. This comes from Dr. Doug Rubin, another one of our patrons at the Wharton Center. Knowing your origins of talent were in comedy, but in the past, you've been personifying serious characters, Castaway, Captain Phillips, The Post, Perdition, among others. Do you feel a natural calling for comedy? Is that still where you feel that you're best at?
Well, you know, comedy, making a comedic movie or telling a comedic story has really shifted as far as the commercial demands of being funny for pay goes. Okay. First of all, comedy has overtaken the world as far as, you know, social media, television. You know, there used to be only one funny show on at night at 11:30, and now there's 14. Right. You know, and you keep up with them. But motion picture comedies have gone through, I think, a striking evolutionary change, because it was this period of time, and particularly like when I started, when I was making movies, you know, certain types of crowd-pleasing movies. Comedies were kind of like a staple of studio output. Mm-hmm. A funny script was almost the only thing that was necessary in order to make a movie. And I think if you go look back now at an awful lot of the comedies, including some that I'm in, they're kind of like soft and shapeless, you know, kind of like variety shows were when you and I were little kids, and every night there was a variety show with comedy skits on them. To make a comedy now, I think it requires a much more different kind of bite and perspective, because between YouTube and Twitter, I think we're bombarded with 300 jokes a day if we're right. Open up to that kind of stuff. Right. So it's not just what is funny, but also what is a funny story, and what is a funny thing that you can pursue. And also, look, I still my comedy chops get a workout every time I go off and talk about a movie on a press junket. Man, you gotta, you know, next thing you know, you're doing panel shows and guest spots and press conferences. Right. And at all those kind of places, I'd much rather try to crack myself up than talk seriously like I am with you, Bert Goldstein.
I'm sorry. We still have a few more minutes here, so hope is not lost.
Good.
Question from Melody Hasselbeck. How do you sustain acting solo for so long in your movie Castaway?
Well, you're not alone. There's a whole crew there. Well, you know, there's probably 60 people at the time. But that was another one in which I can't stress this enough, showed up on time, knew the text, and had an idea. Bob Zemeckis and I, that was I think it was our second film together. So he and I knew each other very well, and we could say anything we wanted to. And we trusted each other as far as going down any sort of like new tributary. When we got to the island on Castaway, we had actually had a screenplay with a lot of talk in it. You know, Chuck Nolan spoke to himself a lot. And as soon as we got there, we both agreed there's no reason to say anything. And it's like, wow, you know, the studio would have gone nuts. But I went to Bob and I said, hey, Bob, why am I talking? He said, I don't know, Tom. Why are you talking? I said, I think the only reason to talk is if you think somebody is there. I said, I think you're right. All right, so let's take out all the dialogue. You'll just act it. That is actually, it's luxurious, to tell you the truth. You get to control the pace. You get to make the points all yourself. I'm not, acting in a movie is hard anyway, because it's a constant battle against self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is the death of acting. As soon as you start having a vision of yourself outside yourself, you're doomed. Because you hate the way you look, you hate the way the sound, you hate the way you look in a hat, you're fat. There's all sorts of things that are wrong with it. But when you get to the place where you're so in tune with the specifics of what you're doing, you're just being. That's like saying, how hard is it to make dinner by yourself? Mm-hmm. It's not hard to make dinner by yourself if you're home alone. You know what you want to make, and you make it, and you just sit down and you eat it. I don't mean to be flip. Right. I'm not trying to cut corners, because Castaway was another one of those movies that took 7 years to make, and that took 7 years of thinking about it. And if we hadn't done those 7 years thinking about it, we wouldn't have been able to get on the island and realize there was no reason to say all that dialogue, right, because we knew what was happening there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the final question here tonight comes from Diane Sheehan. What's the one project you've always dreamed of working on but haven't had a chance to do it?
Well, so that's contrary to your saying, Bert, that I get to do anything I want to, because if I had something, I would have done it already.
Well, for whatever reason, you couldn't do it. I mean, is there something out there, a play, a Shakespeare piece, a movie, a story?
I must say, there, as far as the business goes, time has an awful lot to do with it, because doing a Broadway play means I got to live like a monk, and I have 3 grandchildren, a wife, and a bunch of kids, and a business that I got to run. So, not really fair for me to say goodbye to everybody, because I get to do high button shoes at the Gershwin for the next 8 months. Mm-hmm. That's tough. As far as the business goes, there are questions of financing that go on, and there's, you really have to sell every one of these ideas to somebody who wants to pay for it. And I've had plenty of ideas that I thought were magnificent that languished on paper in its totality, that just were never ever get made. But I think the biggest thing that is the factor of whether you get to make a project or not is that all of these are coalitions. They're alliances that you make with other people that have to be working at the absolute top of their game. No director takes on a job because he wants to do something. No art director, no cinematographer, no costume designer wants to do a job just in order to mark time. You have to get people that hear it, get it, and want to tear into it as much as you do. And there is a hubris that goes along with, some degree of power in which, or creativity that says, hey, I made this. I get it. What, don't you? And they go, don't quite get it. Well, that means there's something wrong with what you want to do. That means there's something wrong with the way you've seen it. So I can't say that there's ideas, there's sorts of characters, there's circumstances, there's things I've always wanted to be able to examine, but I haven't been able to find that great alliance or that kind of like grand unifying theory that makes it clear to everybody. Sure. So we get to it. I'm down here. Let me tell you this. I'm down here right now. Baz Luhrmann, Austin Butler is going to play Elvis, and I'm going to play Colonel Tom Parker. Why? Who in the world would cast me like this? And when I first met Baz Luhrmann, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, a number of other great, Strictly Ballroom, another really great filmmaker. When he came into the office and he said, in his Australian enthusiasm, he says, I really want to make a movie about these two people that could not have existed without each other, Elvis and Colonel Tom Parker. Yeah. And I said, well, I've never heard that before. I've never heard that take. Everybody knows the Elvis myth. No one has ever examined the Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis. Elvis would not have been Elvis without Colonel Tom Parker. Colonel Tom Parker would not have been Colonel Tom Parker without Elvis. And I immediately thought, and Baz did too, about Falstaff and Howe, is that here is a grandiose persona next to a man who will be king. And I will tell you that in not much more than a nanosecond,
right.
I said to Baz, well, if you'll have me, I'm your man. Now, I would never have gone to anybody and said, I'd really like to make a movie about Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis. That idea never crossed my head.
Okay.
But because it came from another circumstance, an impossible thing. Now, we might go through all this effort, and because it's all a crapshoot, we might make one of the worst movies ever made. But you run that risk every time you step before the cameras. To finish this up with the required Forrest Gump reference, Bert. I know you've been champing at the bit to have me bring up the great Forrest himself. Making that movie almost killed both Bob and myself. Okay. It was physically very taxing. Yeah. It was emotionally battering. It was a huge crapshoot every step of the way. Bob was fighting the studio in one way, and I was fighting the studio in a completely different way. We were told we were insane idiots for trying to make this movie. There was a studio executive who actually said, you cannot make a movie called Forrest Gump. I mean, they were fighting us on the title, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
But and we were just pursuing this thing that we got individually. Eric Roth, who wrote it, Bob Zemeckis, who directed it, and me, and I'd say Robin as well, and Michael T. Williamson. We all had different perspectives of why we were making this movie and how. But Bob was the massive filmmaker, and we had just done a brutal month in the heat. We worked at one point 27 straight days with travel and shooting. I hadn't had a day off. I was beat. I was tired. We were shooting the scenes on the park bench in Savannah, Georgia, in which we had 3 cameras. And in the course of a day and a half, we probably shot 30 pages of dialogue, which is like shooting a soap opera, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting there, and we were trying to work out the choreography of one of the shots, because the cameras kept, getting into each other's frame, and we were trying to rehearse with the other actors. Yeah. And I said to Bob, and this is the great truth of all movies, both good and bad, the ones that work and the ones that stink. I said, Bob, is anybody going to care about this guy sitting on this bench saying these goofy things in this goofy voice? And he said, well, I don't know, Tom, it's a minefield. Anytime you put film in that camera, you're walking across a minefield. And it's true. And to sum up things, and this kind of like answers every question about why and how and what was it like doing all these things. And it all comes down to this. If you show up on time and you know the text and you have an idea, you will capture something that is beyond the moment. You will capture something that it might not work when the movie comes out, but you'll be amazed at how some time can go by and a film that didn't work for any number of reasons suddenly has a degree of resonance. Because everybody who was there that day was working at the absolute top of their game. They showed up on time, they knew the text, and they all had an idea.
Kelly wanted to get in one question, so I'm going to let her do that. She's been dying to ask it, and then we'll wrap it up. You okay with that, Tom?
I'm fine, yeah, sure.
Okay, Kelly, fire away.
Kelly, hit it.
this actually came to me listening to your stories of, of your early years as an intern, as an acting intern. As a theater educator myself, I'm dealing with a lot of students and a lot of young people who are now looking at an immediate future where theater isn't live. Depending on where you are, most theaters are still dark. And at Wharton, we say that we keep art at the center of all that we do. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice towards young folks in this, we say these unprecedented times, what they might be able to do to kind of keep their art alive. If you have any advice or ideas or words towards
well,
that.
I'll offer it up from a perspective. Maybe it's right or maybe it's wrong, but don't wait for permission to do this. Do it yourself, if nothing else. I know that social distances go. I'm going to think that there is some place, a corner of a campus or nearby, where if you want to, you could start. You could do it. You could do theater. You could do a one-act play in the middle of nowhere, as long as people will stop by and watch it. There is the amount of technology that is available to, iPhones and stuff like that. Chances are you're going to know a Jose Rivera, who Bert and I met in 1977, and Jose himself said, I'm not an actor, actually. I'm a playwright. I'm going to actually be a playwright. I'm just here because, Vincent wanted me to be. And I had never met a guy who said, I'm going to be a playwright, and actually turned out to be a playwright. Gary Sinise and John Malkovich and Laurie Metcalf, who started the Steppenwolf Theater, they just did it. Nobody asked them to start a theater. They just found a spot and started doing stuff that they created themselves. If you know a Jose Rivera, you know somebody that will know something about recording sound. Sound is very important. I will say this: if there's one area of show business that is underrepresented by the people who want to get into it, it's audio, it's sound, very important. Directing, whatever, acting, of course. So you could, there's no reason for you not to get together, write a 3-minute script and shoot it. There's no reason not to do that, because you can put it up anywhere and people will watch it. But for the live performing arts, improvisational groups, performance art pieces in a corner of the library, anybody could put up a flyer that says, be there, hey, we want a flash mob at 1:45. We're going to do a 12-minute play called The Adventures of Bert, Tom, and Jose. And people will show up in order to watch it. There is this kind of, don't fall into the trap, I would say, of waiting to be invited to the show, of waiting for a phone call to say, will you please come audition for us? If there's no auditions, and never pass up an audition, never pass up an opportunity to be in something. Never say, I'm not really a singer, I'm not really a dancer, I'm not really a comedian, that's not what I'm going. Do absolutely everything that you are possible to do. Go take a job as a demonstrator of Barbie doll toys, if you want to. Do you know who Busy Phillips is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I met Busy Phillips when she was literally dressed up like a Barbie at the New York Toy Convention Exposition Week. And her job was to talk about being Barbie. Now that, believe it or not, I don't want to blow Busy Phillips's secrets, but that actually is fantastic training ground in order for what anybody can become. So to answer your question, don't wait. Do it now. I know that if your schools are closed down, find out where anybody is showing up. Write a play, perform it, do some improv, and do it. Don't wait.
Thank you.
Mr. Hanks, thank you so much for this time.
Bert, I think we've solved everything. Bert,
I think we have. On behalf of Wharton Center and the staff and our patrons, a couple, John and Ethel Anthony, wrote in saying, "Thank you, Mr. Hanks, for helping us during this difficult time. You have indeed opened a window for us," and that's absolutely true.
Well, thank you, Bert.
Been a good friend. I've loved watching your work. I've appreciated our friendship so much, and for you to take the time to do this is just such a great thing. Thank you so
Well,
much.
You're quite welcome. I really enjoyed it. Always like hanging out with you, talking to you. But I do have one request. I really want one of those shirts that says Wharton on the breast pocket, like you're
I'll
wearing.
send you one. I'll send you
What
one.
is that? Is that a fleece? Is it a sweatshirt?
This is just a Land's End shirt they got for us about a year ago, and we have a new logo that they made. We rebranded a couple of years ago, and we got a new
Excellent.
logo. The Wharton Center is named after Clifton Wharton, who was the first African-American president of a major university. And he started his legacy, one of his legacies was to start the Wharton Center. He wanted a performing arts center on campus. And now we have this huge, wonderful performing arts center that's mysteriously quiet now, but we're going to reopen eventually and continue doing what we do.
Not an extra large, just a large, please.
A large? I got it. No problem.
In the black. In the black.
Large and
Looks
black.
cool.
No problem. Thank you, Wharton Center audiences, for joining us for that amazing conversation with Tom Hanks. Just want to remind you that we have an entire season packed with virtual programming for you and your families. We have classes, we have Wharton Wednesdays, we have more of these kinds of webinars coming up. Kelly, what else do we have?
We are working on a brand new Take It From the Top series. As Bert mentioned, our classes are going to be a wide variety of topics for beginners, for kids, for adults. So make sure you check out and see the ways that you can get involved with us remotely.
And I do want to also one more time thank the MSU Federal Credit Union for their support of these programs. We do appreciate everything they do for the arts in this community. In October, I'll be talking with Anita Gaffney, who is the Executive Director of the Stratford Festival of Canada. She's got an amazing story to tell. She began as a teenager selling ice cream in the lobby of the Stratford Festival, and now she's the Executive Director of one of the largest repertory theater companies in the world, managing a budget of $60 million. She has an amazing story to tell. We'll talk about the Stratford Festival, how they're dealing with COVID, what their future plans are. That should be a fascinating conversation, and more to come after that. In the meantime, everybody, stay healthy. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you again, Kelly.